What is poppin', YouTube? Back again with another video. Today we're doing my top 24 running backs in 2024 fantasy football. Let's go. It's going to be good. So tune in, guys. Buckle up. We're trying to get to 500 subscribers, so hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Let's go. If you didn't tune in to my top 12, that video is going to be linked right here. So maybe go watch that first and then come back and watch this one. My RB13 for the 2023 fantasy football season is going to be Aaron Jones. Now, as everyone knows, Aaron Jones is tied to the Green Bay Packers, where they just lost out on Aaron Rodgers because he's going to the New York Jets. And so we got new starting quarterback Jordan Love. Now, the hype is all there for Jordan Love. A lot of people are worried for Aaron Jones, mostly because of the fact that he is just a little bit older. We look at the fact 5'9", 208, but the thing that a lot of people are a little bit worried about with my man Aaron Jones is the fact that he is 28 years old. But as we know, Aaron Jones has been a staple of fantasy football production. We look at the last 3 years, RB11, the last 2 seasons on a fantasy points per game basis, which has been super consistent. So he's been a back-end RB1. And now you're saying to me, Caleb, why do you have him as the RB13 this season going into fantasy football? For me, it really comes down to the fact that as we've known with Aaron Rodgers, he is willing to dump off the ball, especially in his older age. We look at the last 2 seasons, 52 receptions, 59 receptions. Adding in a new starting quarterback like Jordan Love. Now, I'm not saying that Jordan Love is scramble. I'm not saying that he's mobile. But the thing for me with Jordan Love, we don't know what that necessarily is going to look like on a year-to-year basis. So for me, I'm just a little bit off Aaron Jones, just slightly, but being able to get him as my as an early RB2 is something that is super enticing to me. And that is why I have Aaron Jones as my RB13 heading into the 2023 fantasy football season. My RB14 heading into the fantasy football season in 2023 is going to be Joe Mixon. Joe freaking Mixon. Now, the thing with me with Joe Mixon, a lot of people are excited about Joe Mixon this season, and I'm just not as excited. Some people have him in their top 10 running backs. I just can't do it, and the reason that I just can't do it here with Joe Mixon is the fact that if it wasn't for his contract, he might have been cut. He might have been cut from the Cincinnati Bengals. But people are going to say, well, Caleb, he's been amazing in fantasy football the last 2 seasons. Last season, RB7, clearly right here with 16.1 fantasy points per game. The year before that, 18 fantasy points per game. Put him as RB5, RB7. So why are you so low on Joe Mixon heading into 2023? For me, it really comes down to the fact that we've seen Joe Mixon really start to decline in his efficiency metrics. If we can scroll down here, you're going to see really the thing that's been keeping him fantasy relevant on a season-by-season basis is the fact that he is top 10 in red zone touches the last 2 years. And what happens is because of the fact that Joe Burrow is so good for the Cincinnati Bengals, they are getting in the end zone quite a lot. But even if we look, his opportunity share is good, his snap share is good, but it really comes into when we're looking at his efficiency, true yards per carry, RB61, yards per touch, RB35, juke rate, RB54. If he's not getting in the end zone, he's not putting up solid fantasy points for you, and that is why I have Joe Mixon just outside of my top 10. I can't put him in my top 10. A lot of people have him in the top 10. I just can't do it. So Joe Mixon is my RB14 heading into 2023 fantasy football. My RB15 is going to be Miles Sanders. Now, what you might be saying about Miles Sanders here is why the heck is Miles Sanders ahead of some guys? Like, Caleb, you're crazy with some of your rankings. And I totally hear you. But I'm doing this based on how I think this is going to play out. Miles Sanders gets the huge contract from the Carolina Panthers. And what that means for Miles Sanders is the fact that they're going to be using him in a bell cow role. But you don't look who's behind him right now in Carolina. You couldn't even really name him unless you go and look at a depth chart. So for me, I mean, yes, maybe Chuba Hubbard, but let's be real here. There is no Deontay Foreman. So Miles Sanders is going to be a 3-down workhorse. And the thing that they did not use him enough in that Philadelphia Eagles system is his receiving back work. Him coming out of Penn State, a lot of people were excited because they said he's like a baby Saquon. Well, Philadelphia Eagles really only used him on 1st down, 2nd down, and of course on 3rd down, they didn't really need to use him because they had a lot of weapons downfield. And Jalen Hurts, if he had to make something happen, he wasn't dumping the ball off. He was taking off with his legs. So if we look here at Miles Sanders, last season, RB21 on a fantasy points per game basis. But I think for me, if we really want to look and dive into his snap share, he only had a 57.9% snap share last season, RB12 on an opportunity share, which is great when we're looking red zone touches last season, RB4, targets, running back 45. And the targets is what to me is going to really play a difference in this year. If Miles Sanders can get just a little bit more targets, he's on the field a little bit more than he would have been with the Philadelphia Eagles. It makes me really excited for Miles Sanders, and that's why I have him as my RB15 for fantasy football in 2023. My RB16, and this is someone I've been hyping up on the channel. If you've watched my Dynasty content earlier this offseason, you know I love this guy, and especially in redraft, I love this guy, and I'm taking him way earlier than a lot of people in the consensus are taking him, and this is going to be James Conner. Now, James Conner for me, there's a lot of things to like about James Conner. First and foremost, we have the fact that James Conner beat cancer. I mean, we can't talk enough good things about a man that just beats cancer. But James Conner has put up solid fantasy football points the last 2 seasons. RB9 last season, RB7 the year before. And when we're really looking into his metrics, it looks great. And if you look at when Kyler Murray was out, that's actually when James Conner performed the best. If we want to take a look at his game log last season, we can see after Kyler Murray tore that ACL, we're talking about a guy that all of a sudden jumped and he was in top 18 fantasy points per game all the way up to 25. He had a very high range of fantasy points per game, which makes me excited when a lot of people are saying, well, who's going to be the quarterback this season for the Philadelphia Eagles? Who is going to be throwing the ball? How is the offense efficiency going to work? But for me, with James Conner, we know that when James Conner is on the field, he's a bell cow, and that's what makes me excited for 2023 fantasy football. So James Conner right there, as always, as my RB16. For my RB17, can we get a drum roll, please? My RB17 is going to be Alexander Mattison. Now, with Alexander Mattison, brand new running back, starter for the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, he's not brand new, but he's brand new to the starting role. And that's what makes us excited about Alexander Mattison. Now, I know a lot of people have him. They're saying Alexander Mattison is going to be an RB1 because he's taking over Dalvin Cook's role in the Minnesota Vikings offense. The thing for me, we can't really look at his stats because, like we said, he's been a backup. But the thing for me when we're looking at him, he's never played on a bell cow role for the entire season. I mean, we can look and see when, he kind of took over for Dalvin Cook in a few games last season, RB4 in week 18, which was super exciting. But even if we continue to look back on years that when he actually took over the starting role, 16 fantasy points, we're talking about once or twice a season where he was actually able to give him multiple touches. I mean, we're all the way back in 2020 when it was the last week of the season, and he put up 29 fantasy points per game against Detroit, and we can look right here in week 5, and that's all the way back in 2020. So how can we, as fantasy football analysts, project clearly what Alexander Madison's going to be in the Minnesota Vikings offense, especially when they've been one of the pass happiest teams in the NFL? You add in Jordan Addison, you still have Kirk Cousins, you have JJ, where you want to give him even more volume than he's had the last few seasons. For me, it's exciting for Alexander Mattison because he's going to get the red zone touches. I need him, before I can clearly project out Alexander Mattison, I need to see him play a full season under a full workload. Alexander Madison's right there for me in my running back rankings as RB17. My RB18 is going to be Kenneth Walker III. Now, Kenneth Walker has great measurables, but the thing for me with Kenneth Walker was Zach Charbonnet now added in. Kenneth Walker also going down with a little bit of an injury makes me a little bit nervous for Kenneth Walker in 2023 fantasy football. What are those touches going to be like? Because even so, he still put up 13.5 fantasy points per game, which was super great. But when we're looking at his overall landscape of what the Seattle Seahawks were, it just doesn't feel great. If we're looking at a game log, I mean, he really didn't start to get majority of the touches until, like we said, week 6, week 7, week 8. Great fantasy football numbers. Absolutely great fantasy football numbers. It just, to me, when a team invests second round draft capital into Zach Charbonnet after already drafting Kenneth Walker as a second round running back, it makes me a little bit worried about how those touches are going to go. Now, Mike Clay, someone that I love in his projections, currently has Kenneth Walker getting about 60 to 64% of the total touches in the backfield while giving Zach Charbonnet 36 to 40%. For me, it just feels like it's going to get to that 50-50 split, which is not good for Kenneth Walker's overall fantasy football value. And that's just why I'm taking him here. I mean, you have the upside shot that, yes, maybe he's Kenneth Walker of last season where he's putting up crazy fantasy football numbers. You're feeling like you got a back end RB1 where you're drafting him right here. But I would let your league mates honestly draft Kenneth Walker because he's probably not landing here in your fantasy football drafts. And that's just not why I can draft Kenneth Walker over some of the other guys. My RB19 is going to be Breece Hall. Breece Hall coming off that torn ACL. It's hard for us to project out what Breece Hall is going to do this season because if we've looked year after year after year, everyone always says, first year off an ACL tear, do not draft the running back. Now, reports are positive from camp. A lot of fantasy football analysts are getting excited, saying it's a great value to get Breece Hall this late in your fantasy football drafts. The thing is, he's going to be going earlier than this. And that's why I'm not going to ever have any shares of Breece Hall where I can think that appropriate value is going to fall. Yes, the New York Jets offense is going to be so good with Aaron Rodgers, Garrett Wilson. They add Allen Lazard. They add Mecole Hardman. But for me, there's just so many mouths to feed that even if Breece Hall gets majority of the touchdown work, because even last season, 16.4 fantasy points per game with 5 total touchdowns. If you could tell me that, yes, Caleb, that touchdown total is going to go to 10, which I think is very realistic, it just makes me think, how is that going to affect the total touches? How explosive is Breece Hall going to be? Because if we remember, 5.8 yards per carry, that's super explosive. Is he going to be able to get back to that 5, even high 4 yards per carry mark? And for me, I just do not see that first year off an ACL, especially with we don't know what kind of carry count Breece Hall is going to be under. So for me, it's just hard for me to pick Breece Hall over some of these other running backs in this range. My RB20 is going to be Dameon Pierce. Dameon Pierce with the Houston Texans, with my boy CJ Stroud. Dameon Pierce, a lot of people love him as a hero RB strategy super late in drafts because, like we said, 12.8 fantasy points per game. That's essentially what we're drafting him this season. And a lot of people say that his upside's even more. They're like, Caleb Mills was such a terrible quarterback last year. The offense was so bad, and yet Dameon Pierce still put up RB 20 points per game numbers. If the offense just even gets a little bit better, why are you not putting him higher? For me, it's just because the Houston Texans offense and defense, as much as we like that pieces they added with Will Anderson and CJ Stroud, they're still projected on Vegas to be a bottom 3 team. If you're a bottom 3 team, that means you're going to have to pass the ball a lot coming down from late. And yes, Dameon Pierce had 30 receptions last season, but it just doesn't make it for an absolute monster running back that I'm willing to invest in when there's some other guys around him. Like if you can get Breece Hall, if you can get Kenneth Walker, and even some guys, maybe even if I had to choose between this guy and the next guy on our list, which is going to be Jahmry Gibbs, I would prefer to take Jahmry Gibbs overall. And I think the reason I'm taking Jahmry Gibbs over a guy like Dameon Pierce is the fact that Jahmry Gibbs got that first round draft capital. And yes, he's going to be in the backfield with Montgomery. Knowing the offense, I think the Lions take a big step up this year. I'm a big Lions believer. I mean, you have Jared Goff, you have Amon-Ra St. Brown taking that next step. You also still have J-Mo coming off that suspension. You have Sam Laporta. You have a great offensive line. Jahmry Gibbs has proven his elite level pass catching, and that's something that I'm willing to take a risk on. And especially knowing that sometimes rookie running backs, they do get off to a slow start. When we're talking about previous years, we could talk about Javonte, we could talk about J.K. Dobbins, where we're not, even JT a little bit, where we're looking at them coming into the rookie season, and maybe it's not until week 7, week 6, week 8, where they finally start to get a majority of the touches. Even when we were talking about Kenneth Walker, that seems to happen. Knowing that Jahmry Gibbs potentially has that league-winning upside that I don't think Dameon Pierce has, I'd much rather take the shot on Jahmry Gibbs over a guy like Dameon Pierce. And yeah, that's kind of what my thoughts when we're talking about Jahmry Gibbs as my RB21. My RB22 is going to be Monty. And I know we don't even need to really dive into why I think Monty is the RB22. I think the Lions offense is just so good. And if Monty is stepping into that Jamal Williams type role on the goal line, it's super excited for Monty getting the touches. And I do like me some Monty as my RB22. My RB23 is going to be Cam Akers. And I'm not going to pull up a slide because all we need to talk about is the backfield for the Los Angeles Rams. If we look at the backfield, we easily see Cam Akers, Zach Evans, no one else. And with there being no one else in the Rams backfield, that means that all the touches are going to be there for Cam Akers. Now, the same exact thing that I was kind of talking about Dameon Pierce and just having a bad team, I'm a little bit worried about this Rams team. I mean, on defense, you pretty much only have Aaron Donald. You have nothing else around them. Matthew Stafford, the last time we saw him, didn't look exceptionally great. We already have an injury for Cooper Kupp, who's coming off that injury, that hamstring injury, which he's going to be 100% by week 1. But that doesn't mean the fact that they're not going to be having to throw the ball for their lives. And it just kind of feels like this is like the last hurrah for the Los Angeles Rams. They don't have any picks. It just feels weird. And so for me, like Cam Akers, yes, he's a value because he's going to get all those touches, but I can't back it up and say, yes, the stats look great. And he did, though, look very much so explosive last season coming off that Achilles injury. I think we don't necessarily have to worry about that. I don't think he's ever going to turn into that top 5, top 7 running back option in fantasy football that we thought he potentially could coming out of Florida State. But I do like some Cam Akers this season as my RB23. And my RB24 is going to be Rachaad White for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, same exact story as Cam Akers. They're going to be a bad Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask being your starting quarterback. You are essentially tanking for one of these quarterbacks in next year's draft. Rachaad White, with his receiving back upside, is going to get a lot of checkdowns because as much as I love me some Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, I think Chris Godwin's going to be the wide receiver 1. There's not really a chance for Mike Evans to get a ton of deep touches, even though he'll probably finish with 1,000 yards like he always does. But Rachaad White has the option, the ability to get those type of touches. And when you're down, when you're getting those receiving work, we're talking about Rachaad White potentially could finish as an RB15, RB16 overall. I wouldn't be surprised about that, but you don't have to draft him that early. And so that's why I do like Rachaad White here as my RB24 in fantasy football, because I also like his floor is probably like RB27, RB28. So it's a pretty good value getting him here as my RB24 in the 2023 fantasy football running backs. So if you like this video, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. It means a lot. We're trying to put out a video a day at this point. Like that content, it helps me out tremendously once you're here in this community. So when we do these live mock drafts, you're here. We're going to be starting up our redraft league, so hit me up if you want to be in that. It's going to be paid, and we're also going to be doing a dynasty startup here soon, so let me know about that. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.